the Amherst Oral History Project is fortunate to have our speaker today, our interviewee today, George Bickley Beitzel, son of Springfield, Pennsylvania, who came to Amherst in the largest class that I think had ever been admitted to Amherst, if that's not right.
That is correct, I think.
In 1946, right after the war, and whose span, if you consider the 40 years from 1946, when he entered Amherst, until 1986, when you retired as being the chairman of the Board of Trustees at Amherst, and think about change, what's gone on from 1946 to 1986, in general, through the experiences of your lifetime, and in particular at Amherst College. It's really rather extraordinary. And so if there's a theme that we've talked about, it is that of change. And being at the helm of the board during periods when the rate of change was perhaps more rapid than it ever had been before, and indeed ever has been since, because it was the crucial years from 1980 through 86, if I remember that right. So thank you very much for being here. It's a delight to see you, as always. And I guess I'd like to ask just at the outset, Springfield, Pennsylvania, how does one find one's way from being a lad at Springfield High School to being a first-year student at Amherst College?
Well, first of all, let me respond by saying how pleased I am that to have this conversation with you, Dick. I've admired you for so long that it's a pleasure that we're able to do this together, and I thank you for doing it.
You flatter me.
No, you honor me, so it's even. I went to Springfield High School, town of 5,000 people outside Philadelphia, right next to Swarthmore. And there were 72 in our graduating class. Half women, and so the 30 or 35 men in the class, only 3 or 4 or 5 of us, I guess, went into college directly from that. Others eventually, after they joined the service. But I came to Amherst because I knew it was part of the Little Three. And I had 2 uncles who had gone to Wesleyan.
Oh, really?
And neither my father nor my mother had graduated from college. And I thought I'd probably wind up going to Wesleyan because these 2 uncles used to give me the old raspberry every year at Thanksgiving dinner about Amherst and Wesleyan and Williams, and there was only one big guy in the Little Three, and it wasn't Amherst or Williams. So I drove up here with my dad in that December, and he took us to three schools, the Little Three plus Dartmouth. And I only applied to one. I only applied to Amherst. And in those days, unlike today, when it's a real, because I have children and grandchildren who go through, and our family members go through a great deal of anxiety as they go to college and where they're going to go. But I was accepted at Amherst. Half of us in that large class were Peach Fuzz high school seniors.
Yeah.
The other half were really hardened veterans.
So you had about 400.
Yeah, we had 400, a little over 400. So that's how I came to Amherst. My dad really said he thought I would like it here because we had a great evening in the Lord Jeffrey Inn on a December night. In those days, it was very picturesque and well known because it had been in the movies. And we stopped for dinner that night and then spent the night there. And on the way home, my dad said, "What'd you think?" I said, "About what?" He said, "About where you like to go." And I said, "Well, what do you think?" He said, "I think you like Amherst."
Yeah.
Because your mother and I will spend our nights at the Lord Jeffrey Inn.
There you go.
So,
A little different from
a little
today.
different than nothing very profound about that, except it's the truth.
Yeah. No, that's intriguing. Did you find that there was a real difference in interaction between the younger, the 17, 18-year-olds, and the 24, 28-year-olds?
There was a real interaction because their experience was vastly different than those of us who never served. And I was a junior in high school when the war ended. But they were very helpful. And I never found a difference that lasted very long once you got to know the people. Mm-hmm. So I learned a lot from their experiences. And they, I don't know what they learned from me, but I certainly felt no inferiority complex in living with older men.
The college at that time was, if I could put it this way, old Amherst in the traditional sense of what the college was like, in the way of the faculty, in the way of the undergraduate student body. Yep. And now, Lord knows if you look at the faculty and the student body 40 or 50 years later, 60 years later, how would you contrast
the freshmen here today are different. They're women, and there are a lot of people from all over the world, and all diversity in the U.S. But I think rather than comment on that, I would comment on the sameness of why they're here and what they're going to get from it. So that means the college has changed as it fit when I was here very well. Mm-hmm. I have to admire what you and the other faculty members and the administration have done, and the board, for keeping Amherst thoroughly modern Millie. And I think we represent the kind of leadership opportunities that our country needs, and these kids will be part of that.
And we hope we can keep up with them.
That's right. I hang on for dear life.
Well, I've retired, as you know. So after Amherst, did you find history, as I remember?
I did. I read history, yeah.
And you then went very soon into doing into business, and then into the Navy.
Yeah, what I did was, the draft is still on because Korea had started.
Yes.
And I was a student, so that was not important. I had a draft number, and I was admitted to the Harvard Business School right after Amherst. Mm-hmm. In those days, that was a very normal thing to do.
Really? You didn't have to have 3 years?
No, that's exactly the point. They've now gone back to where they were when I went there, but for a long time they thought you'd have 3 years or more for experience. So I went to Harvard, and that year Korea started, and I had 2 fraternity brothers from Amherst recalled and killed. They were fighter pilots. The opponents had jets, we didn't, and I thought it was time to enlist.
Yeah. How, and were you on, what sort of a ship were you on?
My dad said, listen to what the dean of the school says. My dad had served in World War I in the Army. And so the dean went down to the Pentagon and goes, half our class at Harvard, after Panmunjom Reservoir, where we took a terrible licking and a lot of people killed, were kind of upset and wanted to serve. Mm-hmm. And the Pentagon came back and said, we'd love to get those fellows, but wait till they graduate in spring. First year is better than stopping in the middle of the first year. That's what I did. I signed up in the Navy and went to OCS school at Newport, Rhode Island.
Oh.
Then served on a destroyer most of my 2 years at sea.
And where in this, if I may ask, did Ms. Mary Louise Elliott appear?
That's why you're so good. That's the perfect time to ask that question. I had dated Mary Lou at Amherst, and I took off the summer after Amherst. That's when I joined the service. And Mary Lou had lots of suitors. And I was out on the West Coast working that summer. Came back, and what really changed my mind was that Mary Lou sent me a Christmas card when I'd gotten back in school, from the Navy, and I saw her on Valentine's Day of 1952, took her for dinner in Philadelphia, knew the other women I was going out with, that would never work, and decided to take my chances on Mary Lou. She accepted. We got married at Valley Forge Chapel in middle of July, and this last week we celebrated our 58th wedding anniversary.
Marvelous.
So that's how I met Mary Lou. I had seen her from afar. She went to a neighboring high school, and I heard about her. I dated with her at Ocean City during the war, but we really got together seriously.
And she's an accomplished artist as well.
Yeah. Miss Heiss, my third grade art teacher, third grade art teacher, flunked me in art.
We share an experience.
And so I pondered that, and I figured I must have an attitude problem, so I figured I'd solve it by marrying an artist.
Yeah.
And that's how I got my culture,
Makes
such as it is.
Makes very good sense. So after that obviously singularly successful moment in your life,
Yeah, it was successful, happily.
you then found your way to IBM.
Yeah.
How did that?
Well, I came back. I was class of 52 at the business school. I started my first year, so I came back in 55 with Mary Lou, a wife, and a son, and finished up. But they put us back in the class of 52, just coming back to finish in 55. And so I was ready for a job, and I took the job that paid the lowest amount because I thought it might be the most interesting, and it turned out to be that the company was IBM, just getting used to computers. Weren't quite sure what the future was itself for the company, didn't in computers. And they hired 35 MBAs from around the country, and I was fortunate to be one of the 35.
It has to be amazing to realize now, retrospectively, that what you were thinking of at that time, probably, unless you were clairvoyant in some sense, didn't indicate a change in the world that some people would say is equivalent to the Industrial Revolution or even the Agricultural Revolution historically, which is to say the Information Revolution, and how everything has changed in the way of knowledge, access, storage, communication.
Right.
Was there any indication of any of that at that
Well,
time?
I got to tell you, I think maybe Amherst College helped me get ready for that decision in the following sense, that you come to this college, you're used to change, you're used to dealing with what you think is a best strategic objective, not today's flavor of the week.
Yeah.
And so I turned down better paying jobs because I thought they would not be as exciting as something as new as computers. And that's why they hired 35 of us, put us through a special training program, 1/2 the length of the normal program, and it really worked. So, and Mary Lou was willing to take a risk, so we did that. And I think the college helped me to feel confident that the change that I thought might be coming, and you see, it was not a commodity product. IBM is a service,
Yeah.
and intellectually able people are required to program the computers, design the computers, sell the computers, install the computers. And that's what I was very fortunate to fall into that situation.
That's an interesting remark, because possibly one could say that learning flexibility of thought, which the college does try to develop in people, is at least, if not, I would say, more important than what one thinks.
Yeah.
Did you find that this sort of
Exactly.
flexibility was...
Exactly. I think the
useful?
thing that once I had an important boss tell me in IBM, he thought I had a supple mind. I had never been described that way, never thought of myself as that. But I think to the extent I had a supple mind at that time in that environment, I think I got the training here.
It's the habit of rationality, as one likes to say these days.
That's a beautiful phrase. I'll remember that one.
It's Joe, actually someone may talk about Joe Epstein's phrase, who's a philosophy professor at Amherst for a number of years.
Wonderful professor.
So working your way through IBM must have been really an extraordinary experience, being in on the beginning and then working with Thomas Watson. Was he not a mentor, but was he a kind of beacon?
Well, I never really expected to work for Thomas Watson when I joined IBM. I knew who he was. His father had founded the company, and Tom was on the cover of Sports Illustrated skiing at Stowe, Vermont on a sled with a couple of his children over his, and I did that with our little kids, and I said, well, we got something in common. Guy way down here, a guy up there. But I had good fortune in Philadelphia where I worked for IBM and helped install the first computer, the big one, at Rittenhouse Square at the Signal Corps. I taught the computer when I was there. I helped install small machines. And I met Tom Watson along with a half a dozen other people at a dinner party. And I didn't know much about it. We all participated in the conversation. And sometime after that, I got an opportunity to work for him.
Was the idea of service rather than a product intrinsic in what the firm was about at that time?
That's a great question. I want to tell you why. Because Tom Watson once said, the best ad IBM ever had was a full-page ad in the New York Times with the following: only one line of type in big letters, and it said, IBM means service. And that really is what set the company apart, I think, and why, as the smallest company in the field, when I joined it in '55, it had become the dominant one 30 years later. So dominant that we had a fuss with the United States government on where we a monopoly or not. But after 14 years of fighting that, they gave up and claimed we were okay.
The idea then of being easy about changing boxes from one computer to another evolved phase of computing, of the commodity, as you said earlier, I think, was clearly less important than.
That's another very good question, because before that time, everyone was making a computer, and they were all different. It's as though you had postage stamps with all different requirements from various countries. You couldn't put them all together.
Yeah.
And when we announced in April 7th of 1964, something called a System 360, it did exactly what you said. It created a tree of computers, and if you started with a very small tree or a branch, you could go up to the very largest without changing your program. And that really caught the world by surprise, and the great tribute to IBM's engineers and leadership.
And that kind of connectivity is now fully flung. I mean, absolutely widespread with the internet.
That's exactly right. The internet's a terrific thing. It has its pluses and minuses, but that was developed with the help of the government in the academic world worldwide.
It was ARPA originally.
Yes, exactly, DARPA. Yep.
Which was, have to remind me, the Advanced Research Projects entity of the Defense Department.
That's correct, yeah. Which was populated by a lot of the brightest and the best in the country, and really people from around the world wanted to get into DARPA. Yeah, it was a seminal development in computers and technology.
I should just mention that Spike made his way from these, what he would say, humble beginnings at IBM all the way up to the nth level, because I remember visiting you once in the corporate headquarters where it was as close to probably the French nobility as I've ever seen, because you had this great circular waiting room with people all busy on cell phones doing their important people doing important business. I don't know why I was there, just have a chat. And these 5 or 6 little satellite rooms where the panundrums held forth, and he was certainly in that situation. So his modesty about not mentioning where you were and how wonderfully you progressed through your career is not to be denied. Then, with all of that background, you connected to Amherst in the middle 60s as a trustee.
Yeah.
You were an alumni trustee
I was
originally?
alumni trustee. The board, in their wisdom or lack of it, decided at that time they were all old enough to be my father probably, and they decided they needed some young trustees. So they took 3 of us were put on the ballot. I don't know how I was put on. In those days, it was not complicated. There was no real campaign. Mm-hmm. Didn't have to write a lot about yourself.
Yes, pages. Now.
Whereas today, it's quite different, but probably quite appropriate. I make no comparison of anything wrong with that. But I was elected, and I think it was 35 years, maybe 36 years old. I don't know exactly, but it was a great honor, and I was welcomed by the board and treated very well by it. And then they subsequently, I guess, decided maybe these young guys were not that so bad after all. So then George Shin came in, and then someone else came in, and we had a much younger.
Who was the chair of the board then?
I think the chairman of the board when I joined was John J. McCloy, a wonderful chairman and one who helped me a lot in my later life on the board.
An interesting and complex man that maybe we talk about a little bit later.
Yeah, sure.
If it's okay. Then from there, you made your way through you made the great leap from being an alumni trustee to being a term trustee. Is that right?
They called them life trustees.
Life trustees, yeah.
In those days, the rest of the board, 18 members as we have today, 12 were life trustees on for their whole life. Mm-hmm. Today we have life trustees. It's a different definition. You don't serve on the board, you're a life trustee. Then life trustees were only those who were on for the rest of their life. And we had a number of most of the, other than 6 elected by the trustees, the rest run for the rest of their lives.
And the report that I was able to work on with you about the future of the college in whenever it was, the middle 70s.
Well, let me ask you this. What did you think when you heard we were going to try and do that report?
Well, I was, this isn't about me, Bob.
No, it is, because I really want to hear you were a distinguished young faculty member.
I was the rawest of the raw. I was a very young man, and it was a trustee faculty committee. It was called the Long Range Planning Committee. And we were charged originally with a very narrow scope by Calvin Plimpton, who was the president of the college at the time, and whose half-brother was the chairman of the board of trustees at the time, Francis Plimpton, who had been and was for a long time the permanent U.S. representative to the United Nations. And the committee was, the faculty on the committee were Ben DeMott from the English department, who was a senior member of the faculty and a very high-flying individual. George Kateb from political science, who was arguably one of the most intelligent people I've ever run across. And this clown from chemistry, who was a very young man. I think I had just been tenured or promoted, 67, just been promoted. And we instantly got together with Spike and other trustees and exploded the vision of the committee, much to Cal's botheration, I think, a little bit. But he was Olympian enough in his presence, bless him, that he dealt with that easily. And among the things we dealt with were issues like the nature of the trusteeship, which is what we're just speaking about now. And maybe we'll talk later about other long-range planning matters like the use of the endowment, coeducation, and other central issues that really have changed from what I said was the old Amherst to a more modern Amherst. And Spike, I have to say, was the catalyst for a great deal of this change, whether you will admit it or not, in bringing the college from this group of older life trustees, eternal trustees, into a more flexible, better listening, I think, group. I think there was more information that percolated up than trickled down subsequent to that period of time. It's an extraordinary 4 years in the life of the college. Intellectually, it's the same. Organizationally, it may be different. But this is about your leadership.
Well, no,
really
but they're related, you see, because whatever extent, and I remember asking, this was after I'd been elected a life trustee. I guess I was 4 years as a alumni trustee, I had 2 more to go. And for some reason they said, we'd like you to serve as life trustee. And I was flattered, of course. But then I thought about it. Here I wasn't 40. And if I lived to be 60 or 70 or 80, I really didn't see that was a very good idea for me or for the college. So it wasn't just that I was doing a favor to the college. I was trying to do a favor to myself because of the nature of change, which I was quite used to. And I saw IBM changing left and right. All the institutions that I'm familiar with were either changing or going out of sight, as they should.
That's very interesting, because then there is, in some sense, an analogy between change or evolution, let me say evolution, at IBM from being originally what it was to the evolution that you see at the college.
Yeah.
It moves in at least a related or cognate way.
That's my sense. And I think the country, fundamentally, is what drives that. They may not know they drive it, the average citizen. But I really think it's a citizen as much as it's a leadership. And it was certainly true in IBM, where we had an open door policy and anybody could raise Cain about anything they wanted to without prejudice. And
It was that accessible. I mean,
it was called the open door policy. You write the chairman.
Anyone could write to the chairman.
And I probably handled 150 of those inquiries when I worked for Tom Watson. And 85% of the time, management was quite correct. And we told the guy why, and that was the end of it, man or woman, employee. But anybody could do that without telling anybody else they were doing it. You just wrote a letter. And it had a code on it, so people didn't. The only guy that knew who wrote the letter was myself, and then whoever I closed the loop with recommended whatever they do. But I think that notion is a powerful notion for the electorate of the country and for the kind of democracy we have, because that we got a law, and people, by and large, want to follow the law. You got to have a theory of the game. Yeah. That's my theory of the game.
At Amherst now, anybody stands up, and as always, as you know, given the lunacy of the faculty, I'm a faculty member for 43 years, so I can say lunacy. He's a little bit more restrained. And say anything to anybody at any time about anything, clearly, with good and bad effect. The civility is something that...
well, now you're being modest, because you were not just a faculty member, you were a dean a number of times when the college really needed you in that slot. It was terrific.
I don't know.
And I keep referring to you as a dean. You may have noticed that.
Yeah, well, everybody has a loose cog somewhere. It was mainly, when I was dean of faculty, you were the chair of the board, and you empowered that office to do things that it had not been able to do before. So anything that we were able to do in the way of change derived from the support of you and other members of the Board of Trustees, which was a gift that many people in the administration previously and subsequently, I must say, may not have been so fortunate to have standing behind you. Mind you, you were a great teacher, and several of your colleagues on the board were also wonderful teachers for someone who had always been on the other side of the desk, ranting and raving about administration, to then be in administration and understand that at Amherst, the lunatics are in charge of the asylum rather than anything else. But enough of that. When you came on the board, you had already, did you chair the $21 million capital fund campaign?
No, I tell you what I did.
Or was that at the end of?
No, that was before I came on the board. They have, I guess the history was that Amherst had a campaign in 1946 that didn't go very well. Yeah. And I didn't know anything about that. And then, and before I came on the board, but it was in around 1960, I think, they started a campaign, having had 15 years from the last bad experience. And I was asked to, they had 3 tiers. The top tiers were for the big givers. The middle tiers were the next level, who would give substantial gifts. Mm-hmm. And then I was asked to lead the campaign for what I call all other. and
Which is the great.
We had the all other really responded, because I was trying to make sure we had the right participation.
Yeah.
And out of that time, and we did, and out of that time is when I think we really got going to where Amherst today is usually in the, if not the top, tied with Williams or Swarthmore for 60% participation by the alumni.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important, much more than the size of the gift. I'm a great believer in the notion the widow's mite is as much for the cause of freedom as the wealthy guy trying to get into heaven.
Well, just so long as they keep giving is important. But then the amount that was raised in that campaign was?
No, we raised 21 million. We would have had 18 million. Then John J. McCloy, who was then running the Ford Foundation, got 3 million. So instead of stopping at 18, and I had nothing to do with this, I was down in the trenches working, but they lifted it from 18 million to 21 million so that the residual, the 18, after the 3, would be the full campaign amount, not that we could take a deep breath because we got that big, and $3 million in those days was a lot of money. And matter of what we're sitting in here was a function of that campaign, the Robert Frost Library. And you were here when Robert Frost came and dedicated it.
An amazing moment.
Yeah.
An amazing moment. Yeah. The next campaign was for something like 40 some odd.
Yeah, we started out with 40. I think we got 45, and I was involved in that. It was the board agreed that we ought to start again, and we did, and we exceeded it. I keep thinking of comparisons, and I use this one. In 1960, $1 would buy what it costs $6 today to buy. So that the one campaign that got 21 million was really 126 million by that notion. And the 43 million was probably a multiple of 4 or 5, maybe a couple hundred million.
Yeah.
But I do think the college has done extraordinarily well in having people support it.
Why?
You got to tell you, when I step down, you know my theory.
Oh, that's true.
So I had nothing to do with it. I'm a great believer when you're through, you're through. I come back to board meetings. I'm always invited to come. I only come back if the chairman asks me to come because I might be of use to him, or if there's something on my mind, but I haven't been to a board meeting in years. And I follow that in all the places where I've been involved in leadership.
A useful philosophy. because
Well, I don't know, it works.
It works for both sides. It works
Yeah.
for the individual,
Yeah.
and it also helps the institution not have to
Yeah.
look over their shoulder. in
Yeah,
some
I think
sense.
the board has done a great job raising, $1.7 billion before the break. That's a lot of money.
Yes, I can remember in 1980, well, I'm going to say 83 or 84, the endowment became 300 million.
Yeah.
And that was extraordinary. And that's fewer than 30 years ago,
Right.
Roughly speaking. Well, when you became, how did you become in the position, how did you find yourself ultimately in the position of becoming the chairman of the board?
I just elected. I mean, I don't know no more complicated than that. And
Isn't there usually someone that goes round and sort of
yes,
gets a
yes,
sense
yes,
of
yes. Yeah, the board
how
had a
people-
good process. I didn't invent it. I've used it, and I think we used the professor from Columbia then, who was president of Mount Holyoke,
David Truman?
David B. Truman, a wonderful man, a great help to me. And he went around, I think, and talked to people. And then when he came to me, I told him 3 or 4 people I'd be happy to see and work for if they were chairman. And but out of that, I got the nod.
So
by
an
the board.
informal consensus of,
Yeah, well,
a
he
few
goes
people
around,
is
and
reached.
then he reports to the board, I guess, what it is, and the board then votes, and that's how.
were you the youngest chair? Were you the youngest person to
I have
be
no
chairman?
idea. I have no idea. I really don't.
As I remember George Shennett when he
George
was
is
the
older than
chairman,
I
was-
am.
When he became,
He was
your
after me.
predecessor.
He was after.
Is it-
Oh no, he was before me.
Yeah.
You're right. Yeah, you're right.
So I think,
After that was Tom Wyman.
yes.
Yeah, I had that. But I don't know whether he was younger than I was or not. I've never looked at it that way.
Yeah.
I can't answer this
It's
question.
the Satchel Paige view of,
Hmm?
it's the Satchel Paige view of doing anything. Don't look behind. You can't
That's
tell
right.
who's catching
That's
up
right.
and all of that. Well, while you were the chairman of the board, and while you were on the board, to be sure, was the 70s and the 80s. A thick time, a busy time. Was one of the first issues you had to deal with as chair the Westover sit-in situation, the Vietnam War situation?
That Westover Field thing, I was not chairman. That would have been in maybe
68,
68, yeah. But I was here and I spoke up at that. And actually, my own view was we had a new president who had been a faculty member. It was off to a good start, and he was having trouble understanding the role of president versus faculty member. And the problem was that as president, you cannot represent yourself. You cannot, if you're president of something, you represent the institution.
Yeah.
And there's no one who would tell him that. And it all snuck up on us all of a sudden. And so that's the way I viewed it, part of the education of the president. And we had some board members who were very upset about it. We had some big givers who decided they were not going to support the college because of that, because they were having trouble understanding that he was not trying to say the college was against this. He was trying to say it himself. They had the same thing in reverse.
Yeah.
And I thought they should know better, and the time would work it out, and it did, because he became a fine president, and the people who were disaffected over time came back.
Yeah. We're speaking of John William Ward, who had been a history professor at Amherst, who came as Henry Steele Commager's successor, not that you could ever see, but followed into that position in history, who, as Spike says, was making the transition from being an individual and an outspoken and very decent man to being the leader of an institution and working out the differences between the individual within the, well, it's a constant question, isn't it?
Sure.
How does the individual act within the institution? And there were no real structures in place at a college or university for that, because Bill may have been the first faculty member, well, Charlie Cole probably was, but the first faculty member to become president in a time of great flux, where there was passion.
Did Charlie teach here before, or was he he was at Columbia?
I think he was at Columbia.
And so he came in as president. Yeah. The same year he got inaugurated, I heard him give his inaugural address.
Really?
1946, over in the chapel.
Extraordinary figure in the evolution of the college, in a way of making it more modern. More modern, what does that mean? That means a greater integration of the eternal commitment to teaching in a younger faculty, as you were a younger blood on the Board of Trustees, with the idea of continuing scholarly engagement. So that one of the changes from the 60s through the 80s was a significant change in faculty and their ways, their engagements. Less engaged perhaps with being Mr. Chips, and more engaged with being a first-rate committed teacher, but also continuing their scholarship, which is something that was fostered by the administration at that time. Right. Did the trustees have a sense of that evolution?
Well, I can't speak for the trustees. I certainly thought, what I thought you might come up with is relevant. I thought the college must be relevant. And that you said in a much better phrase, commitment to teaching and openness. But I think the college had to be relevant. And one of the toughest things the college had and the trustees had was that Vietnam War, because I could see it was affecting how we gave out grades here.
Oh, yes. Great debates on that.
And honest debates. And if I had a son who was a student, I certainly would like to not see him go to the service until at least he finished his year or whatever it was. And they all had drafts, draft numbers. So that relevance was very important. And then we had that terrible situation out there at Kent State.
Yes.
And the board then was asked to come back to the college. I did come back for 3 days.
Well, you were actually out there sitting in with students.
I did sit in with students, yeah.
What did you make of that?
Well, I didn't make a lot of it at the time, but I've made a lot of it since, because one of the students that was with me out here on the Common is now a trustee, and a fairly prominent one, because he's a good author, and I'm sure a wonderful trustee. But Scott Thoreau, when I came back from one of the meetings years ago, maybe a decade ago, he told me he had gone to that meeting and sitting around the grass there, and that I was answering questions or listening to what the students had to say. And the school, of course, shut down. I think we had no exams that spring, or they were delayed or something. Optional, yeah.
Amherst waffling.
Yeah, well, that's all right. Well, you got to make trade-offs.
Well, it's Harry Truman, although he'd like a one-handed economist, rather than on the one hand this or on the one hand that. It'd been nice to resolve what it was. But it was optional.
You saw that better than I did, so I accept your point.
Optional.
But anyhow, Scott said he remembered meeting me out there, listening to me. He went back and told his roommate, well, I heard a trustee today, and I've concluded all businessmen are not bad guys, something like that. So I really, that made the whole exercise a different dimension for me, because that's not why I was there. I was here trying to represent the board with other board members. But it was nice of him to say that and remember it.
The idea of relevance, though, is the integrating factor in
Yes,
the education and the participation of the trustees.
exactly.
I should say one other thing about Spike, and that is, in the minds of the faculty, or some faculty who are still here, he was one of the few trustees who actually walked the grounds, one might say, and would pop in and visit people in odd places at odd times.
Tell them about the time I caught you at the bottom.
I'm working late one evening in the lab, but this is about you, really, but this is
No.
typical. And I was in my lab underneath a heavy work table with the largest piece of apparatus on it that required a vacuum pump that did millionths of atmospheres of pressure, very low pressure. And it wasn't working, and I'm on my back trying to undo it so I can get it cleaned up and working. And I look out, I hear this voice say, what are you doing? And I look out and I see knees and shoes. Now, the fact that the shoes are well shined tells me it's not a colleague. And it turns out to be Spike. And I said, you're gonna have to wait a minute, I'm doing all of this. But the point of this is that he did go to classes. He sat in on people's classes. He made the rounds. And it's not often before or since that many members of the board, or especially chairs of the board, actually do that. So there's a history of this relevance. It wasn't spying, it was curiosity. It was wondering how the place is doing rather than in other individuals. But that was an interesting, it was about 10:30 at night, I think, or 9:30.
Yeah, but see, I had forgotten all about that. That's really my point, as I had forgotten. I never knew about Scott Turow. So the fact that something did in the normal course of work was helpful to the people I was working with is useful. It gives me a little confidence that maybe it's not crazy to do some of the stuff I do, but I do it because what you said, I have a huge curiosity about anything.
The symbolism of the chairman of the board of trustees saying to you, can I sit in on your class just to hear what you're talking about? Or showing up in the middle of the evening alone in a lab, looking around and seeing what's going on, never was lost on the faculty. I mean, it shows an engagement and an interest that is different from any of the caricatures one can make of a board of trustees, a manorial presence looking from the manor house down on the workers, or something of that sort, which has been the case, but certainly was not the case with you. Was there any analogy then between the kind of Vietnam War experience that you saw at the college and participated in at the college, and another issue that came really to the foreground when you were the chair, which was the college's investment policy, and in particular investment policy in South Africa?
Exactly. I remember that debate very well. The board was split on it, and some boards had said they'd stop investing in South Africa. Most people were silent, most boards. And I remember we had a meeting over here at the, you were probably dean then.
Yes.
So you were part of this whole thing. You were a participant, an observer, and historian of it. But I think that was a very important day. And it's funny, I thought about that coming up here because I thought about Ted Cross. Mm-hmm. I just finished reading. I went to his service. Have you seen the book? Have you seen that water thing book?
I haven't.
I'm going to bring mine up. I meant to bring it up today, but you and I will be seeing each other as we finish up this happy task together. But I thought of Ted because they also have the current issue of the for Blacks in Higher Education.
Yes.
A memorial. Did you get a copy of that?
No, I haven't. But
Well, I got it from the college, and I'm sure that they would give you a copy. I was going to bring a copy up, and still I'm going to give it to my nephew.
Can I just say that Ted Cross was a trustee, and I think you might characterize him better than I can, but who was a first-rate investment person, but even more importantly, was committed to improving the diversity of the college, and in particular in admitting more black students and finding more black faculty.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
He was, and particularly, even before the emphasis on the blacks, he was very worried about the blue-collar admissions.
Oh, yes.
And he voted against, or had his temper, the ability we had to price the education. Mm-hmm. And that cuts both ways because, of course, we support the faculty, support the grounds, and support tuition students, scholarship students, with tuition. But if you start supporting it with the endowment, which is the point you were raising earlier, that's a whole different story because it's different because the faculty feels that that's not a bad idea. It's not being cut out of the budget, and the people who give the money can enhance the effort to have the middle class have access to the college, and then ultimately minority classes who may or may not be middle class, but they also had a problem. We had one black student here when I was at the college, and we had a black trustee. The Judge Hasty was on the board when I was, and he put his arm around me. He was terrific. He really helped me be a board member.
And his daughter was.
His what?
Was his daughter not a
Oh yeah, well,
lawyer?
Well, she's terrific. She's down in Washington.
Yeah.
She may still be a trustee.
I'm not sure, but I know that she was.
Well, she's a talented,
very talented
leader in Washington.
Yeah.
But Judge Hasty was fantastic, and of course we had that the mentor of the Black Supreme Court.
Thurgood Marshall.
Yeah. Was mentored by Charles Houston, I think.
Yes. That's right.
Charles Houston. So we've got a good tradition for that. But to go back to your point, your question was about investment in South Africa, and that in turn relates to how we looked at the admissions of minorities here, and that was complicated by the debate on coeducation, because they all converged
at
on
the same time between 1886.
Yeah.
But you said you were thinking of Ted Cross.
Yeah, I was
on the way up here.
Yeah.
With regard to
investment, because you did a great job on that.
Yeah.
With regard to being strongly feeling that we should not invest in South Africa. So here's a fellow who's helped the college greatly, took us from the bottom quartile to the top decimal, what do you call it, top 10%?
Decile.
Huh?
Decile, perhaps. I'll make it up.
Decile. In a dozen years.
Ted Cross was deeply engaged not only in investment considerations, but also in the composition of the undergraduate student body in the way of more blue-collar, so-called.
That's correct. He was very worried about our tuition increases being absorbed. If it's 5% of a large amount of money and you're making a small amount of money, it may be 15% of your income just to fund the difference. Mm-hmm. And he was very worried about that. And he was eloquent on it. And in a couple of years, we actually thought if we did not go up, our peers would not be able to go up, because they wanted to be competitive with us as well.
Yeah.
And And so I don't know how I never tracked the dynamics of that, but I thought it was a good point.
Did the college discuss the uses of the endowment in contrast with the way other institutions use theirs, and what comes to mind? And one of the reasons why it's interesting that Ted was involved, because he lived in Princeton,
Right.
is that Princeton has historically been pointed to as an institution that uses its endowment as if it were a bank, rather than an institution that uses its endowment for some social purpose.
That's very interesting. Tell me more about that.
Well, their takedown from their endowment policy was extremely restrictive. So they were
less than, not less than 4 or 5%?
Yes, indeed. So they really were running it, in principle, not the joke used to be, but the characterization, false or real, was that their endowment was run like a bank. Whereas when you were on the board, it underwent a significant evolution from just being in debt instruments to being somewhat in debt, somewhat in equities, to being then, with Ted and others, yourself and others on the board, to expanding the investment universe significantly.
But I think it's related to how well the investment is doing in the endowment. And when we were at the bottom 10th, I'll tell you a story on this. When we were in the bottom 10th, I would go out and ask a guy to give me $1 million for Amherst. And he'd say, well, what is it going to do with it? Put it in the endowment fund. Well, how are they doing? Answer, bottom 10%. He would say, look, Spike, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to take that $1 million, keep it until I die, and I'll make a lot more than 3%.
Yeah.
And I think that may be part of what was the difference between Princeton. I don't know how Princeton was doing versus their peers, let's say Yale and Harvard, in terms of growing the endowment. Because if you're not growing it fast, it's harder to take money out.
Surely.
And I think Ted really had us, that same fellow, by the way, 3 years later, we got from the bottom 10th to the top 10th, said, Spike, can I invest some money with Amherst?
Yes.
And it turns out now today you can.
Yeah.
So all those things have, as the saying goes, it's a long lane that never turns.
The universe of investment is now very, very different.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
David Swenson, who's the
Yale
guru
guy.
at Yale, really his book on institutional investing really was quite an eye-opener for many, to be sure. But Ted was even antecedent to that in his
He
view
was antecedent to that.
of other modalities
Yeah.
for.
And not only that, but he set the stage himself personally by being very generous.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, and you really have to do that if you're going to talk about fundraising. You got to have leadership that steps up to the bar, and he sure did. And others on the board. We were, matter of fact, he challenged us with $1 million grant if the board would raise $1 million for the beginning of that 43 million you were talking about.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that was very successful.
Yeah, and the board did do it.
Yeah. Let me ask you about another issue that is intertwined that you have alluded to already, where many things came together at the same time, and that is the change of the college to being a coeducational institution.
Yes.
That old committee that we were on recommended that, but yet there were members of the committee who were not really quite convinced at the time, and understandably so. The faculty, as you will remember, was unanimously in favor of it for years and years, but that's another story, a totally different story. And then Bill Ward more or less took the issue over because it was on his watch, and established study groups and so on. Would you remember what the processes were that were gone through in the consideration of
Well, it's a
education?
long time since I thought about it, so my memory may be faulty, but I remember my own role in it, which I'll be glad to say. I don't know when our committee gave our report. When did that report come out?
I was afraid you were going to ask.
Okay, well, that's fine. Then it came out before what we're talking about now.
Yes, yeah.
I would say it came out maybe in the middle 60s.
Middle 70s, early 70s.
Middle
yeah.
70s, yeah.
Probably.
Yeah. But I was not chair when that came out.
No, you were
That's right. I was
happily a
sit
member
in
of it.
the seat trustee. Well, I was not convinced that we had to go coeducation at that time because the Seven Sisters were not moving very rapidly toward that. And a lot of colleges were not moving that way. And I thought it was a very fundamental issue. So the first time around, I did not vote for it. That must have been before Bill Ward came on the scene. I don't know. I don't remember the vote,
Yeah.
don't remember the debate very well. But when Bill Ward came on the scene, Bill wrote a paper stating both sides of the case, because no one really had, I thought, a better, and it was great that he did that. No one asked him to, as far as I know.
It was actually quite a courageous thing to do because
Yeah.
there was very little representation
Yeah,
from the faculty for opposing coeducation.
Yeah.
So you want to hear both
but
sides.
he
when you're
wrote.
trying-
I think he was involved in both sides, and he was for coeducation.
Yes.
So the faculty should have. I assume they knew that he was not changing flags when he wrote the other thing. I wanted to show the board you can make a case for it. Do you want to make a case on this ground? If not, what do you like? That's where I thought it was effective. But his paper then got me thinking. I talked to Ted Green, who was our history professor here, and a friend of mine. His brother, younger brother, was a close friend of mine there. And I asked Ted, what do you think about this thing? And Ted said, I think we ought to have coeducation. And I said, why? He said, we ought to have coeducation because I think I can teach better in a class of mixed minds. Mm-hmm. Well, game's over. The minute I heard that, I flipped.
Yeah.
Because you can't have a college with a faculty that thinks they can do the job better. It's like telling a guy to dig a ditch instead of having a jackhammer, give him a pick.
Yeah.
And you can't have a college with a faculty. And our faculty weren't a bunch of nuts. And the more I thought about it, because I knew I was going to get a big blowback from the alumni, but then I figured half those alumni have daughters.
Which they didn't seem to realize at the time. I mean, a
That's
lot
right.
comes together in
A
the
lot
60s
comes together,
and the 70s.
and the blowback was more than offset with the alumni daughters raising their hand and moving in.
Yeah.
And when you think about the vote in our country, which the women didn't get to early 20s, was it? I don't know when it was, before I was born. And you look at now the impact we have on our society with women and on the world. You know, it's crazy not to have a class of mixed minds if the faculty thinks they can teach better. And you can't argue the point, I never have, that women aren't as important in the equation as men.
Oh, certainly not.
Yeah. So why not let them have access to whatever they want to do? And out of that grows my notion. In our family, we marry for love. In our family, you go to a college where you'd love to go. That's that simple.
The idea of being able to teach a class of mixed minds even worked its way into the sciences in the sense, not that science has gender associated with it. Physics is physics. Chemistry is chemistry. But if you teach a course on technology, or if you teach a course on an outreach course on genetics, let's say, or something of that sort, where you might deal with technologies of population growth or control. Not to have women in the class is insanity. Ralph Bales, who was in the economics department, and I taught a course on technology once, and we did do a section on population. And the women and the men, mind you're dealing with 17, 18, and 19-year-olds, or 20-year-olds, the arguments that took place in that class, I wish we had taped, because never would that have happened, and neither side would ever have received the education that they had gotten just from the classroom in that regard. And certainly in history with Ted, I mean, from Abigail Adams onward, just in American history, American studies, his field, it would be very, very different without that sort of presence, to be sure. What were, I mean, the main elements that were not engaged by the idea of coeducation? Was it too much of a change in some sense from what old Amherst had been? Was it going to change? Did some people think the way of the place, the sociology of the place?
Well, it's hard to felt. That's long enough ago that I would only comment in this sense. Every time I met a college graduate, over the years I was on the board, and then particularly when I was chair or raising money, when asked what was the best thing about Amherst, they would always say it was just the right size. It was 600 people, 800 people.
Yeah.
So I think the average cat is very hard, since he's not around where the change is going on.
Yeah.
It's hard to envision why, since he had such a great experience here. Everything was just right when he was here.
Yeah.
It was a very selective group of privileged young men. I often thought after World War II, never better time to be a young American male and go through the experience I did, because everything was going right. Good education, economy was good, computers, medicine, the atom bomb, the whole mess of things. It's an exciting time to be around, those 20 years. And so to not have experienced that in the college setting, it's no wonder to me that they thought Amherst was just perfect when they were there.
Yeah.
I never tried to change them on that. I made the opposite argument, which was, so that means the people who were running the college when you were there knew exactly the way the college ought to be run.
Yes.
And that seemed to disarm them.
Yes,
when I thought about it.
I would think so. Or now, or any time. Absolutely. The question of remaining as other institutions, Harvard, Yale, other institutions turned to being coeducational institutions. Radcliffe, in a sense, disappearing ultimately, or Jackson, I think, was Tufts, if that's right, Tufts Annex, as it was called at the time. As other places changed, was there a sense that we should retain our uniqueness as an all-male institution?
No, I don't really think that was the argument. I think the argument was a counter to that. Will we get the same caliber of all-male in the face of all this other places where it's a mixed crowd? Because there's nothing wrong. Young men like to be around young women as much as young women want to be around young men. So I never thought that was the issue. I thought the issue was the one I described, which is Amherst was not co-ed when I was here, and the most tangible evidence, what I'm going to now say, is something you're very familiar with. But that is, the fraternity system when I was here was unique. Mm-hmm. Everybody got a bid to a fraternity. Mm-hmm. And there may have been some people didn't get the bid they want. That's life. You never get the girl you want, so you go until you find you get the right one. But we never really focused on the fraternity dimension of co-ed until it came apparent from the bottoms up that the fraternities were not very hospitable to women, mm-hmm. or at least all the women. And that's when I remember walking down the avenue with our interim president after
Armour Craig.
Armour. We walked down we went over and had dinner in the little town where the guy was the horse and buggy in prep school up here.
Oh, Deerfield.
Deerfield Academy.
Right.
By the way, he offered me a job when I would have left college. I could have gone there or I could have gone to graduate school. He was very tempting.
Oh, Frank Boyden?
Frank Boyden.
Boyden,
yeah. He was a great Amherst fellow, and I've been an Amherst trustee for years.
Yeah.
But we were walking down that street, right past the door where the axe was still there from the massacre.
Yeah.
And Armour said, you know, Spike, we ought to really take a look at fraternities. He was an Alpha Delta as I was. He'd always been supportive of me personally and a great teacher for me. And I said, why? And then he told me about the tales of women coming here and not feeling part of the institution the way I did,
Yes.
and most of my classmates did. And so out of that, we set up a committee to look at it. They came back with that report, and we turned off the all-male fraternity system.
It was convenient. It was the right person in the right place at the right time, with Armour being the acting president.
I think so.
Because of all of his bona fides in being
Exactly.
Old Amherst, for
Yeah.
that matter.
Yeah, and his wife was the sister of a fraternity brother. I'm sure that's right. And maybe not. His wife had some connection. I think maybe. But leaving that aside, he had a lot of bona fides, and we went ahead and did it, and it was the right thing to do. And you know, that really is the way you got to lead institutions that are competitive. If you think that it's in Adam's will they're going to be competitive all their life, you know, look at American business. The list of the top 50 corporations in America in 1910, one or two are there today. IBM had not been founded yet. U.S. Steel was the top one. General Electric is the only one today, 50 that I can think of, that is still around. So
the idea of being able to change and be more inclusive of different people and different ideas is
I thought if we hadn't,
key to that.
If we hadn't, if not now, when, is almost it was in my mind.
Yeah.
Because it was still in a transition stage. It would be one of many people doing it, as opposed to being an outlier, and you're the last major institution to finally change.
There was some question that was hot and heavily debated about the effect of becoming coeducational on Smith and Mount Holyoke at the time. Bill Wilson, as a matter of fact, was the dean of admissions at Amherst College and was the dean of deans of admissions in the U.S. for that matter, because of his many, many wonderful qualities and his longevity and leadership in that area. But he held at one time that we would be doing damage to Mount Holyoke College and to Smith College if we were to become a coeducational institution, because part of the attractiveness young men and young women being near each other, to be sure. The decrease in the number of young men that it would mean at Amherst and so forth would have an effect on five-college cooperation and that sort. But that seems, while being debated as an issue at the time, not to really have carried much weight.
Well, I don't know. I never spent a lot of time on that issue because it's very hard if you're running an institution to not use you're a great Harvard baseball player. If I'm trying to win the game for my team, then I will throw the fastest fastball I can develop. And if it hurts somebody else who's not on my team, I'm sorry about that, but that's not, I don't know how we manage that.
Yeah.
I don't know how would ever measure the advantage that they gain by us not going co-ed. It's almost like trying to prove a negative.
Yeah, no, I think
And I think, my view was Dartmouth was up there, they hadn't gone co-ed then, I don't think.
they had a very difficult time.
So, no, I think we did the right thing. I think America did the right thing in getting more people into college, hopefully making it affordable through scholarships so the meritocracy thing works. And I think it's wonderful how many people in the Amherst class are probably first in their family to go to college, still.
Then we are fulfilling the, what is the motto? A college for indigent young men at the time.
That's
indigent
right.
Young people of piety.
That's right.
So
That's
men
right.
and piety are not necessarily still there, but the indigent part.
Yeah, but I'm not. But even that today, I think I can't defend that today, because I had classmates who did go into the ministry.
Mm-hmm.
But I think service is a much broader category than just ministry. It wasn't when the college was founded. We had two categories, farmers and professionals. And most professionals, there are probably more ministers than there were educators, or doctors.
Sure.
So, but today, my sense is that the mission of the college is to perform the best thing it can for the people it can attract, the best people it can attract. And that has to change as our country changes. You may not like it, but if you don't like it, then you're not going to be connected with something that is going to really serve the country.
What was the view of the trustees? Because another issue that developed more rapidly when you were on the board was the idea of 4-college, then 5-college exchange or cooperation.
Yeah.
Do you think that was, at least in some ways, economically driven, or will increase in being economically driven?
I never really understood how we measured why we had 5-college cooperation. It's very hard to measure it when they're not all being measured the same way. Mm-hmm. And there's someone who's captain of the ship that can say, we've done this, by doing this, we've done this, and here's why we're better off doing it than not. I think the practical matter is that there are good faculties at a lot of schools. We can't be everybody. Everybody's business is nobody's business, so we had better make sure we understand what we're doing. Mm-hmm. But if we do that and someone else wants to use our faculty to do it, and our faculty is willing to do it, I think that's a plus. That's the old simple-minded idea. If I have $1 and give you $1, we each have $1. If I have an idea, you have an idea, then we each have 2 ideas.
Yeah.
It's a simple-minded notion, but it really, I think, appeals to people because it's hard to measure the efficiency or the effectiveness or the economics of these institutions.
Oh, they are very different. A large university,
Yeah.
a small college that is very Hampshire, that is very idiosyncratic, and Smith, Mount Holyoke that are single sex, and then Amherst.
Yeah.
So the metrics may be different. There are advantages, though, as you point out, in not trying to be, say, Amherst, representative of everything on the map
That's
of
right.
knowledge.
That's really my point. And I think that's true with companies as they get bigger, as countries do, maybe even families, I don't know. But at a certain point, things get so diluted, it's hard to tell who's in charge.
Mm-hmm. Or to keep levels of excellence.
That's right.
Uniform levels
That's
of
right.
excellence.
That's right. It gets diluted. But on the other hand, by having the 5 college cooperation, you have a vehicle that if someone really wants to learn, and I think they had a great astronomy professor somewhere. I forget what, but it was something I hadn't thought about, and we didn't have it here, or we didn't have the best here, or whatever it was. And we could shoot the people over there. That's kind of like, I have an idea, you have an idea, and it helps the process.
That's a very good example, because I think the first 5 college department came about when the astronomy departments that were very small at Smith and Mount Holyoke and Amherst coalesced with the much larger department at UMass.
I'd forgotten that.
So that
Well, that may be
people
why.
could major in astronomy and still be at the individual institution at which they had matriculated. And it worked very well. I mean, research
And you know,
opportunities.
that really raises the point that it's not right for the faculty to not have tools that they need for you, for those atmospheres you were chasing at night.
Yeah.
But to have, and you know, I'm delighted that we have plans on the way here to get a new science building. We are overdue. My classmates tell me that.
Yeah.
Frank Austin tells me that.
Well, it has stood. We moved into it in '68, which is 42 years ago. Yeah. And started planning for it in '65. And the old chemistry building, which is now the Moore Dormitory, lasted about 40 to 50 years. And then it's the infrastructure, the internal structure that needs sizable replacement with change. No, it's a very nice idea if it's done at the right time with right
the subject,
responsibility.
history, my subject, may not have changed a lot. The only change I ever remember reading about was the Germans tried to have scientific history in the middle 1800s, and apparently didn't go very far. And the whole notion of a scientific approach, the 4 or 5 principles of science approach, don't really hold up in human dimensions, in my view, the way they do in chemistry or physics. And so you don't need a new history building all the time. You may need a new subject, but this science thing is very important, and that will affect our ability to get bright young scientists to come.
And both faculty and students.
Yes,
And
particularly
also
faculty, because they'll bring the students.
The boundaries have changed. It isn't just classically biology, chemistry, and physics. They're all inextricably intertwined now, and so that requires a different kind of instrumentation, a different kind of equipment, different approach to instruction than one had before.
I'm very impressed the way you keep, because I think that's exactly right. That and it's not complexity. It's only complex if you don't manage it right. But all things, they're all actions, interactions, and in today's world, technology is allowing a lot of that to happen. And the worldwide politics are a lot different than when Britain ruled the waves, or the American century, call it what you will. But I do think the intersection of all these vectors are what Amherst ought to do well. And if we don't have the scientific vector in there with the people who come here, I think we're at great risk.
Is there any sense of how the student body ought to be determined? I don't mean admissions policy as such. I mean in broad strokes. they should pay attention to more or fewer, I don't know, pre-medical students, or more or fewer people that say they want to go to law school? Or should they just admit the best people? I don't know how they determine that from 8,000 applicants for 400 positions, but whatever best means in that sense.
Well, you know, I tell you, I think that we are best able to navigate that minefield by deciding what it is we're trying to do. And I think there's very little we can do in 4 years. This wouldn't be plaudits with my associates, faculty or board or anybody else, but I do think that we should be very careful to really understand what we do well and excel in that. And that will change in definitions over time. Mm-hmm. When you look at the landscape we talked about today and the new issues that came up, well, Amherst is somehow adjusted and still looks pretty good to the outside world, worth trying to come to. And you know more about this than I do, but I know at Harvard they said they turn away 2 classes for every class they take.
Oh, yes.
So it's pretty hard to screw it up.
Yeah.
And therefore the important thing is to decide what the objective is and hold people accountable for measuring that, who run the place.
Yeah, how you measure, that's the metric of measurement of success for a place like this is very slippery. It's very difficult to pin down. It's nothing you can say, well, that's 93% or something like that. You can do it in terms of where people go, but whether you are inculcating in them the habit of rationality that we were talking about, or the ability to be flexible that you were speaking about, was so important.
But you see, that got into that's this brouhaha going on about lives of consequence.
Ah.
And that's very hard. I think there's nothing wrong with that notion, but it's very hard to then define what that means. And I don't know whether you were in Johnson Chapel, the class of 75. Were you there when Tony talked?
No, I wasn't.
Well, you'll love this. Class 75 was there, so that would have been what? That would have been 25. They were there for their 35th reunion, right? Mm-hmm. And they had a big banner up on the second floor, and it said, "We are the results of lives of consequence."
I see. Lives of Consequence is the motto or the name of the present Capital Fund campaign, which is why it comes into conversation.
So, but my view is, in 4 years, you really can't tell what's going to happen. And I think we got to be very careful to think that we are going to do something here in 4 years that's going to be the difference between huge success or huge failure. Mm-hmm. I mean, I look at my fraternity brothers, and they're, and I don't think any of them have failed as an Amherst student to do the best they can in life. And the ones who've been most successful are ones who went after what they really were good at. And that could be a teacher, it could be a preacher, it could be a doctor, it could be a politician, a worthy politician. It could be all kinds of things. And I think to try to measure why our lives of consequence are so many this and so many that is a very hard and probably not a very compelling notion. Mm. That we are what we are, and we are lucky to have been here. And if we really are trying to help the world because of this education, that's no question about that. But how will we do it? I don't think I can say anybody. I don't know anybody who would say the 4 years here have made a difference in life between their view of success and their view of failure. No.
But I think everyone would say they were arguably the most formative years of their
That's correct.
lives.
That's right. Most selfish is what I characterize
Well,
it.
that's understandable. It's a time of great flux. Just to return to the chairmancy of the board, or the board
Yeah.
in general, what would you say are among the more important things, the 2 or 3 or 1 or whatever number, important things that the board does for the institution?
Well,
I mean, you've served on corporate boards,
yeah,
and it may be
I-
a bit more straightforward there because there's management.
and you're
there's
up
the
for
board of
annual
trustees.
reelection,
Exactly.
and you're measured on your results of the institution.
Right. This being on the board of an
But I've been on
institution like this-
nonprofit boards and foundations. The best example probably Colonial Williamsburg. But I think the most important thing a board can do is, and I'll tell you, I'm really proud of this, but at Amherst, we really made it tough from a collegial standpoint if you didn't show up at meetings. And we scheduled our meetings 3 or 4 years out in advance. So it's pretty hard to say if you were going to join the board that you couldn't control your calendar. So personal matters of life and death, and I think we had, most of the years that I was there, and we talked about this, and I gave a report on everybody who wasn't there. And they knew I was going to do it, and they were not offended. Matter of fact, they were defended by the fact I said it. But I think most of the time we had over 90% attendance. Many times we had, for a year or two, we even had 100% attendance. I did the same thing at Colonial Williamsburg, and we had, for the years I was chairman, I think we had almost 100% attendance because it showed the board had enough respect for the institution and for each other that they would not be on that board unless they could show up. So I think that's the first thing. It's not just showing up, but it's participating. And I think we always had enough variety in the boards that we could hear views on all sides. And we had a wonderful guy named Walter Gellhorn, you remember him?
Very well.
Who was, I think, one of the most useful board members I've ever been associated with.
One of the most intelligent people I've ever run across.
Yeah.
You had to answer. He wrote long letters. He didn't do telephones. And you had to answer with a letter.
Yeah.
More hours spent writing draft after draft of the letter that was going to go through the mind. Walter Gellhorn is the man who wrote essentially the law for Japan after the Second World War. That was his enormous gift to that society and to the world. But in any case, he was an Amherst trustee and a very, very
Yeah, and his
brilliant
brother
law
was head of
professor.
the medical school at Penn. His sister married Hemingway. And it was a very wonderful family, talented family. But Walter would always speak up and be helpful. And I think the board needs people like that. And because he would sometimes bring a new perspective to it that people hadn't thought about. And when he did that, then people did think about it, and that enhanced the value of the board. We certainly have a fiscal responsibility to manage the college. We're responsible to the Commonwealth of Massachusetts for the security of the assets and the other legal responsibilities. So, but I think the main thing is to know what's going on and to make sure that the leadership is doing the right job.
How about the choosing of the president? That must be a seminal job.
Well, I don't know. I can only tell you what it was when I was on the board. I haven't been involved in choosing presidents for 2 or 3 decades. But what we did was have a committee In some cases, the chairman run that committee. They chair it themselves. I did not think that was the right idea because I thought it would be less. I thought it'd be better to unify the board if they heard from their peers who they thought was best than if they heard from the chairman, because then it's pretty hard to go against the chairman without rousing hard feelings one way or the other.
That is, the advocacy by the chairman might make a president-elect appear to be the chairman's person.
Yeah, well,
the board's
whatever. But I hold no grudge against anybody who look at it differently, and others have. And we've had, I think, by and large, a string of very good presidents. And we have emergency presidents when we lost our president a week after I was with him in Chicago.
Oh, Julian.
Julian Gibbs.
Oh, that must have been an extraordinarily difficult moment for the board. How did Julian Gibbs was president of Amherst for 2 or 3 years and died suddenly on a weekend after skiing. And that represents an entirely different kind of emergency situation. How did the board handle something like that?
Well, in that case, we happened to be having a meeting anyhow 2 weeks after he died. So the week before our meeting, 1 week after he died, we had a meeting of the, I was up there in the college, and we had a board meeting, the same as I was used to having at IBM when we got everybody on the telephone. Everybody had material. We talked about it. We came up with a plan, and the plan was to assign the dean as acting president, which is normal in these situations. The acting president to carry on responsibilities of the college until the board got together and decided what to do next. And so that took place. And then we had a meeting, and we had discussions among the board. Some of the faculty were very helpful in this discussion, and we wanted to not wait around if we could avoid having a long search period, because then you really tread water, and the interim guy or girl cannot do much. And anybody you're talking to about coming in has got to look at not what the deceased president was doing, but what the interim was doing.
Yeah.
And it gets very complicated. And so we tried to see if we could reach a decision. And what we did in this case was pick a very well-known member of the faculty and a leader of the faculty in many ways over the years, one of the leaders in Armour Craig, and asked him would he be interim president, which was different than an acting president. We merely made him president, not acting. And that lends a certain dignity and power to the slot that you don't have if you're just a placeholder.
Yes.
He was a placeholder until we found someone to replace him, but he was also an incumbent in the place. There's a difference.
Well, and as you mentioned earlier, he was possibly within the institution a motive force for getting rid of fraternities. And the right person rather, at the right time, in the right place. That must have been very difficult, a very difficult time, given the complexities of personalities of the dean of faculty then and the...
Well, that happened a long time ago, so it doesn't seem quite as complex and contentious as it may have been with various people. And people have written their points of view on it. But I know I'm very relaxed we made the right decision getting Armour there. And then out of that came, I think, Peter Pouncey was the president we elected after a year.
An excellent.
And we had we had 3 very good candidates for that, and the board, as they have done ever since I've been here, decides who they want to have, has a vote, and then the vote is always unanimous.
Mm-hmm.
So the board is always behind the new leader, no matter whether someone else had another horse they were betting on or whatever. Makes no difference. We always converge at the end. And that's a very powerful way for boards to operate. A friend of mine named Marty Lipton, who invented a lot of, so he's a great guy. He's now chairman of NYU, but a great New York lawyer, once gave me advice from the board. He said, this is a business board being sued. He said, as long as the board's unanimous in what they do, no one can defeat you.
Mm.
And I really followed that advice because it's right. There's no one else to talk to if everyone's agreed on it. And if everyone can agree on it, then you probably may not be making the right decision.
Or the problem may not be well defined.
That's correct.
And just defining the problem moves you right moves you in the direction of the
Well, I've
of the
talked
right
to you about
solution.
my boss Kettering.
Yes, that's a good story.
Boss Kettering. Boss Kettering was the fellow that did Sloan Kettering, helped General Motors, and he's the one who saved women many broken arms because he invented the electric starter for cars in Dayton, Ohio, where the Wright brothers came from. So it must be the water in Dayton or something. His idea was a problem well defined is a problem half solved. And I was lucky to get that advice early in the game.
Yeah.
Because I think it's really right.
You had many predecessors on the board as chair, and there have been many people, not many, some before and some after. Would you mind talking a little bit about what it was like to have probably the man who was Mr. American Establishment, John J. McCloy, as your introduction to the board? I mean, a man who advisor to practically every president, high commissioner for Germany after the war, a man of assistant to Henry Stimson as Secretary of War, and a complicated man, presumably, given various decisions that people would say were admirable or not necessarily admirable, under conditions certainly of great pressure. Was he a...
He was a strong bulwark for when I was there. One of the problems we had was the cross professorship, which was going to go to Ted. I think had it always be he wanted to have a series of scientists of color at a reputable institution to attract young blacks to it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that emerged over time to where the faculty, which was based on merit, legitimately said, well, that's a problem because that's why we don't let the Maharaja of India or somebody have or some potentate with their oil country have it, because the incumbent's always going to be a spokesman for that position. And what we did was they decided to have the first, his name was Richard?
Dick Goldsby.
Yeah, Dick Goldsby. And he's in that edition of the Higher Education for Blacks review I mentioned to you that was published in honor of Ted Cross's life. But then after that, it would revert to the normal. So having set the stage that it was a job was worthy of anybody, and to find someone who was anybody qualified, and then to find someone of color to take that job, really broke the ice. And then after that, I think we've had Amherst positions. We've had people of color and race and all kinds of stuff. I think it really opened the door.
McCloy was very supportive of this. I say John
Yeah,
McCloy.
John J. McCloy was very supportive of this. and so was Walter Gellhorn. And John J. McCloy used his influence to support it because it was the right thing to do. And later on, I had a couple other tight situations. He was in the hospital, 92 years old, I think, when he told me this. He said, well, Spike, he said, I'm out of the hospital. I said, well, that's great, Walter. Jack. He says, yep, I'm coming up for air for the third time. That's the way he portrayed.
Well, he certainly had a long and very influential life.
He sure did.
It's interesting that he opposed the dropping of the atomic bomb on human population centers. If you remember, he and Francis Biddle and Joseph Grew, the three of them,
I'd forgotten that.
Were really quite opposed to
dropping it on
being used against civilians. They wanted military targets rather than civilian targets.
You're talking about Jack McCloy.
Yeah, to his great credit. He also was influential in convincing Stimson to cross Kyoto off the target list.
Yes, I knew that.
Places,
he told me that.
That were involved. But then on the other hand, there was this unfortunate involvement, as happened in England and in Scotland, with the internment of Germans on the Isle of Man, the internment of Japanese in the West during the early part of the Second World War.
But he got the Supreme Court to approve that before he did it.
Yeah. But again, it's just the
it was
general
part of the
idea.
history.
But
I think, as I recall, what he told me was that happened because they didn't know where the Japanese fleet was after Pearl Harbor.
Ah.
Then the fifth column was a big deal in those days.
Oh gosh, yes, that's right.
And we had 70,000 Japanese in California, some of whom inevitably would be either recruited or were part of a fifth column, and nobody knew which. And,
well,
and the military said, that's a real problem for us because we may be fighting here to protect our shores. And that's why he took it to the Supreme Court.
That was taken over from the English, who did it much earlier with the German population in England, using the same fifth column notion, which derives from the Spanish Civil War and the general who was advancing on Madrid with 4 columns and said there'd be a 5th column from inside that would join me.
We forget, really. I was at Oshkosh this week for the big air show. Flew out there with my son and a bunch of others, but we went there and saw the battle, the planes going over Berlin in April, I think, of 1944. Mm-hmm. And it showed the number of, we had 300 airfields in London, and we're going to bomb Berlin. And it showed all the B-17s and B-24s that were lost and the pilot's name. Hmm. And it was about 50 planes, never came back from just that one attack.
Yeah.
And it takes your breath away when you look at that.
So you've run the gamut from immediately after the dropping of the bomb that ends the war to today. That's more change than most people, I think, really will ever experience. Has it been fun?
I've been a very fortunate man. Been a lot of fun, and I've enjoyed every minute of it, but I've been very lucky. I've had a chance to do things I enjoy doing, and I was raised in the family with the notion of that's the right thing to do. The institutions I was involved with growing up supported helping others, and I really enjoyed it. And I've never viewed it as a task. I viewed it as an opportunity, including this session today, for which I thank you very much, Dean.
Mr. Chairman, You're very kind who've done this today. Not just I, but the future that gets a chance to look at this will, I think, profit greatly from it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
A pleasure.
And thank you, and you.